Welcome to Spotlight on the Real Science of Sport podcast with Professor Ross Tucker and Gareth Davies.
Yes, indeed, folks. Welcome to the Spotlight. This is one of our Discourse Digest Spotlights where we take a swing around the world of sport and sports science and bring you some insights on the sports news that we have some thoughts and opinions on, much of which, as always, is informed by your contributions over in our Supporters Club. More on that shortly, but today we've got a fairly substantial story, I think a really interesting one, about a footwear company being sued for causing injuries. We'll discuss the merits of that case and some others. And then we take a swing around the athletics awards, some dramas in track and field, a little bit on rugby. And yeah, we'll see maybe a few little surprises pop in. I mentioned our Supporters Club. That's a group that you join by clicking on the link in the show notes. That'll take you to patreon.com. You become a patron of the site. And then in amongst what you get, obviously, you get the warm, fuzzy feeling of supporting the podcast, but you also get access to our discourse community, which is a community of people who I guarantee you knows the answer to every question you could possibly ask. Someone there will know the answer. I was reminded of that this week when I was looking at buying one of those Insta360 cameras. Gareth, we've been talking about this. And I couldn't figure out how to mount this thing to my road bike because I don't have the vertical bolts underneath the stem. And sure enough, one of our very, very first supporters of the pod, a guy called Graham Smith, who's a keen local cyclist here in Cape Town, got in touch and he explained to me how he did it on his. And I'm now set and I'm going to buy myself that for Christmas. And in fact, I bumped into Graham this morning after a ride and finally got to put a face to the name and the contributions that he makes over on Discourse. So the point is that if you've got a question, whether it's about equipment or physiology or training or diet or whatever it is, there will be someone who listens to this podcast who is willing to help and who knows the answer. So that's my punt for Discourse this morning. It has been amazing though. Like there's nothing you can bring up. Last week we brought up Formula One. Of course, I know next to nothing about Formula One. And sure enough, we were schooled about Formula One in a really interesting post by one of our members.
Yeah, apparently street circuits don't make any difference to porpoising. Who knew? Well, I should have known before we released it, I suppose. Yeah, I don't remember the name of the guy, but he knew a lot more about Formula One than I do. So thank you for filling us in on that one.
Down to the wire, the Formula One.
By the way,
because since we brought it up on podcast, I now get Instagram content fed to my phone on Formula One, so I'm now becoming an expert. But the final race is this weekend, no?
Yeah, I think it's all coming, as you say, down to the wire because I think didn't McLaren mess it up at the weekend again?
A little bit, it seemed like, yeah. Yeah. So anyway, so thanks, Graham, for your help on the Insta360. That'll be a Christmas present I get for myself. Speaking of Christmas, we're coming up to our Christmas break, and our final podcast before we take that break will be kind of our annual look back at 2025. We'll call it our awards show. We did one last year. It was fun. We'll try again this year. And Gareth, you've created a topic on Discourse where our supporters can go and vote for their nominees, as it were, and then we'll discuss some of those. It's been fascinating. Some of the stuff that our listeners remind me we did, I've forgotten we even discussed.
Indeed. Some of the podcasts, because one of the categories we've got is their favourite podcast that we've recorded this year, and some of them I'm thinking, I don't remember doing that this year. And,
like some of them are from a few months ago, and I don't remember it.
Yeah, so but obviously we're getting some good engagement there with people's memories, and there are events that happened. I forgot the Lions tour happened. You know, it's been a bit of a mad year, and the women's football, women's rugby World Cup. There's been so much going on in sport, and I think we just sort of glaze over a lot of it, don't we? We just like all goes into one massive continuum, and so we just go for what's the most recent.
Yeah, pretty much. There's a strong chance of recency bias when we do that podcast. Anyway, speaking of glazing over sport, we've got a few things to tackle in today's show, news stories and whatnot. And we start with what I thought was a really interesting piece because there's so many little threads you can pull on this one and try and explore. And that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to apologize in advance for any either deliberate or inadvertent foot, leg or shoe puns that we may throw in as we discuss our first topic this morning.
Yeah, indeed, because this one's all about shoes that promise to make you faster. which is the Nike Alpha Fly. And allegedly, they've left a runner permanently disabled. And what I'm talking about is a lawsuit which has been brought where a former elite runner is taking on Nike themselves, arguing that the Alpha Fly 2 super shoes that she bought, it didn't just make her faster, it also injured her. Heather Kearney, a former high-level NCAA Division One runner, she's filed this lawsuit against Nike, claiming that the super shoes caused a catastrophic career-ending foot fracture. And she alleges that the design of the shoes caused her to suffer a sesamoid bone fracture in her left
Yeah.
foot. The suit claims product liability, negligence, and failure to warn of potential risks related to the footwear's geometry, which Kearney argues imposes extreme stress on the bones during typical running gaits. And the thing is, you need to give the background really. And it's surprising to me, it's a one-off occurrence because she bought the shoes in November 23 and she competed in the San Francisco Turkey Trot, which is a 5-mile road race. And this is the first time apparently she wore the shoes and the only time she wore the shoes. And she finished second overall, but she's claiming it caused this bone fracture. So that's the first thing that struck me is, firstly, you never wear new shoes in a race. But in this case, that's sort of by the by. One run for 5 miles in shoes is surely not going to cause a catastrophic injury.
No, and that's the first thing. If I were Nike playing defense on this one, that's the first point I'd make. I'd make the point, and this is why I think the story is so interesting, because there's an injury epidemiology argument, there's some lessons about risk management, there's obviously some legal things, but we're not the Law of Sport podcast, so we'll gloss over those. But the point is, on that day, because they all do turkey trots in the US, Thanksgiving, 10,000 people ran, and this injury happened in 60 of them, for example. And she happened to be wearing a new shoe, and so she's attributed the injury to the shoe. But what's the reason in the other 59? And I guess the point is that injuries do happen. And then when you look for the explanation for the injury, it's easy to land on saying, this is the only thing I can think of that has changed, therefore it must be the injury. And so you relate you kind of infer causality. And what Nike would play is, hang on a moment here, injuries happen, it's running. 2/3 of runners get injured every single year, maybe not with this particular injury. And yes, you changed your shoe, but unless you can prove to us that the shoe caused this specific injury, we don't have a case to answer. And that's going to be her legal barrier or challenge to overcome. Because there's no doubt injuries are what we call in the field multifactorial. There are dozens of things that all converge to create or reduce a risk of injury. And there are, in fact, a bunch of papers on this. So, for example, just last year, a paper was published called Risk Factors for Running-Related Injuries, an umbrella systematic review. And what an umbrella systematic review does is it kind of gathers all the systematic reviews, which themselves gathered all the papers. And so this is kind of like an assimilation of the assimilations. And there's a figure in that paper, and as always, this will be in the show notes. Those of you watching on YouTube will see it. And what that figure does is it takes some of the studies that have been done on trying to find the risk factors for injury, and it summarizes them. And I'm not going to go through all of them because it'll take minutes. But some of them have got, they divide them into 6 different categories. So there's training characteristics, there's biomechanics, which related to kinematics, and then there's biomechanics related to kinetics. So the kinematics means angles and flexibility, etc. And then there's biomechanics related to kinetics, like the forces when you land. There are individual attributes, there are health and lifestyle attributes, and there are morphological attributes. And so, for example, doing more mileage, no surprise there, running more than 30k a week is a factor for injury. Taking longer breaks between training sessions, having more shoes, which is an interesting one. Participating in more than 6 races per year has a small impact on injury risk. Having higher peak braking force, having medially directed center of force during the 4-foot push-off phase. So from the basic all the way to the more complicated things, these things have all been studied and related to injury. So when you now find yourself in a legal case and you have to show that running 5k in a new pair of shoes caused the injury, I think there's too much noise to find the signal that caused it in that case.
Well, even in an individual, there are so many different possibilities in just your running gait alone. I remember there was a thread on Discourse about running gait and running form, etc. And it's so complicated. It could be one of so many different factors. She could have changed her forefoot strike, heel strike, mid strike. Just that alone changes the whole biomechanical chain right up the body. Uh, wasn't there a study that did think prove or not prove, but it postulated that carbon plates do alter your running mechanics, though?
There's certainly a plausible biomechanical argument to be made for it. And the study, I think the one you're thinking about, was published in 2023 and was called Bone Stress Injuries in Runners Using Carbon Fiber Plate Footwear. And I remember, in fact, at this time, another one of our Supporters Club members, Kate, sent me this paper saying, interesting, like it was a matter of time. Because the shoes came along, obviously, you mentioned, with a promise of enhancing performance. But in order to enhance performance, they were going to have to change some element of mechanics. And the key thing, because you can go back and look at that review that I've just mentioned, and you can look at all those things. There's one thing, one catch-all term that definitely increases the risk of injury, and it's change. Whenever you change something, whether that's training load, whether that's more speed work, less speed work, whether that's a cyclist changing the height of their saddle, there's a risk. Whether it's changing your shoes, which is the one we're obviously talking about here, there's definitely a risk. And what this paper did is it described 5 athletes who had run in these carbon fiber shoes, and they had identified that they'd all suffered these navicular bone stress injuries. And I'll just read to you the conclusion. Given the introduction of carbon fiber footplate into athletics, strategies may be required to reduce risk of injury due to altered foot and ankle mechanics. This article is intended to 1. Raise awareness on possible health concerns around carbon fiber plate footwear. 2. To suggest a slow, gradual transition from habitual to carbon fiber plate footwear. And 3. To foster medical research related to carbon fiber plate technology. So this has been discussed, and I remember even in our discussions of the carbon fiber shoes, because we're not fans because of how they've distorted and recalibrated performance, but there have been some people who've said, hey, you just give them a while, these shoes will cause injuries. So there's a plausible basis for it, is the point. But proving that this specific one in this athlete was the cause is another challenge altogether.
I remember somebody saying that to me once about injury. It was, what's changed?
Yeah.
What is the difference? If you go back and find that change, you're likely to find the root cause of, and usually it is, you've increased your mileage, as you say. I did laugh because one of those factors was having numerous pairs of shoes, apparently.
Yeah.
It was, I did ask you about that yesterday. Why does having more pairs of shoes make you more risk of injury?
So
any idea?
No, but let me answer that by giving you an example of, and we'll take the conversation in this direction. About 15 years ago, barefoot running became all the rage, and there were people who were saying, throw your shoes away, you don't need cushioning, you don't need motion control, you don't need fancy foams, you just need to get in touch with the ground, literally, and run barefoot. And one of the studies that was quoted as being supportive of that was a study that had been done in Haiti, where they'd found that people who ran barefoot and never owned shoes were much less likely to be injured. The big problem is that people who own shoes happen to also be wealthier and were therefore much more likely to go to the doctor and report an injury. So that was an artifact of, and I wonder whether this finding about having more shoes is the same thing. It might be that people who are more injury prone buy more shoes, and so it's reverse causation, right? Or it might be that the people who buy more shoes are also more likely to be captured as injured because they are just that population who will go to the doctor and report the injury. It's the reverse of the Haiti situation. And in fact...
Right, I was thinking of it more...
You were thinking that...
I was thinking more of, on a physical thing, where if you kept changing your shoes, your feet never got used to being in a certain configuration.
So that could also be the thing. I remember going to one of the IOC medical conferences that was held every couple of years, and the keynote talk was given by a very famous, probably one of the most famous biomechanists in our field, a guy called Ben O'Nig, who was working out of Calgary before he retired. And he gave this keynote, and he was telling the story. He'd consulted with Cirque du Soleil, and they were finding a lot of stress fractures in their gymnasts because they would run They do loads of these high intensity plyometric bounding drills, and the surface that they were running on was. They thought that it needed to be as soft as possible, but you couldn't make it only soft because then it had no rigid supports. So it was designed to have these sort of wooden beams underneath a soft surface, which meant that sometimes when your foot hit the ground, it would land on the wooden beam and it would be quite a hard landing. And other times you'd land on the bits in between the wooden beams and it would be a soft landing. And they said, hang on, you're actually creating a risk by trying to give some soft, some hard. Rather give them only hard and don't change the landing from one step to the next. And he described that they'd reduced the bone stress injuries by giving them that consistent feedback instead of altered. So there is a possibility that changing shoes, it depends on what your shoes are, obviously, but it could be that if you go from lightweight to heavily cushioned to a shoe with motion control, you're effectively changing the biomechanical feedback properties so often that you don't make a constant adaptation and therefore adjustment to protect you. So it could be that, or it could be an artifact.
Well, saying that, we've seen this before, haven't we? With the barefoot running trend that you mentioned earlier on. Remember Born to Run, the book, where everybody suddenly went mad for barefoot running. And we saw actually a lawsuit against Vibram.
Which was won.
I think was settled.
Yeah, well, not won, it was settled. So let's call it a moral victory.
It was settled, wasn't it? And it cost Vibram, Five Fingers as they were at the time, I think 3.8 million. And because they were making claims, weren't they, as well, though? Because Nike have never made any claims that these shoes are going to reduce injury. They've made claims that they're going to make you quicker or more efficient, but they've never claimed that they're going to reduce injury. And I think Vibram claimed that their shoes would strengthen muscles and reduce running-associated injuries. And their claims were anecdotal, weren't they? They sort of lacked scientific validation, as it turned out. And so they settled, I think it was like sort of out of court, wasn't it, for 3.75 million, and they couldn't use these claims again. And funnily enough, when we were looking at this, Skechers had the same thing, didn't they? Around the same time.
Yeah, one
Skechers
week apart.
were claiming something.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were claiming something even more wild, weren't they? That there were other health benefits, such as weight loss as well. Weight loss, cardiovascular health, all from wearing their shoes, increased muscle activation. And they ended up paying, I think, 40 million. And were told they could never advertise that way again. So we've seen precedents from this, but those were over sort of spurious scientific claims. And I don't think Nike have ever claimed that in this case. So you can't really go down that route with them.
Yeah, so that's the important distinction, is that this is a specific claim that a product caused an injury. The Vibram claim, the Five Finger claim, was a claim that they had made false advertising, and there's actually still, the website is still up. Obviously, the opportunity to claim is long gone, but there's a website literally called Five Finger Settlement, and if you'd bought those shoes between 2008 and 2014, you could basically file a claim and you'd get what they estimate to be between $50 and $90 back, because you'd been conned effectively into buying the shoe that couldn't be proven to do what it claimed. And it was an interesting time then. Like I ended up doing some research on the barefoot stuff, because I bought two of those shoes. Actually, I could have got $100 back, now that I think about it. And I bought them because I met a guy from Harvard. His name was Daniel Lieberman. Well, his name still is Daniel Lieberman, and he was an evolutionary biologist from Harvard who had done some of the early studies on barefoot running and what it does to the gait and the running mechanics, particularly the foot strike. And I remember at the time, like there was so much hype, and they Born to Run obviously popularized it, but the academics rode in behind that. And Lieberman was one of those guys, and he'd done a study where he'd gone to Kenya and he'd found all these adolescent boys who'd never worn shoes in their life. And when you look at how they run, they all landed on the front part or the middle of the foot, whereas the similar aged adolescent boys in the United States, the Western world, who'd grown up wearing shoes, most of them, 9 out of 10, would land on the heel. And he said there's something fundamentally different about this. And when you measure, this is quick biomechanics, when you measure the forces as you land, when you land on the heel, there's this very sharp spike on initial contact. It's called an impact transient. So impact and then a short-lived transient spike, which is like in the hundreds of body weights per second. It's a really jarring impact. But when you land on the front of the foot, that spike all but disappears. And so you, in effect, you smooth out the landing. And the reason this was thought to be really important is because that impact transient has been linked. It's one of the risk factors for injury, particularly bone stress injuries, what are called shin splints, but anterior shin pain, some knee injuries, and so on. So the theory was born, never proven, but theoretical link between the change in the biomechanics when I run barefoot and the injury risk on the other side. And what was so interesting is I remember looking with a friend, and he eventually became a PhD student, still a friend now, and we said, but there's something wrong here, because when you looked at Lieberman's data, 10 people who've always worn shoes, 9 of them land on the heel, and 1 of them lands on the middle of the foot. If you ask those same 10 people to run barefoot, they don't all shift to the forefoot landing. Only about 3 or 4 out of those 9 who were heel strikers make the shift to the front. The other 5 out of 9 stay on the heel. So now what you've done is you've taken someone who landed on the heel in shoes, and they land in the heel barefoot. So they're doing the worst thing biomechanically without cushioning. And so we said, surely there's a subset of athletes who are going to be more at risk from running barefoot than protected. And Lieberman made it sound as though, take your shoes off and you'll find this forefoot landing and you'll run like you're running on ice cream, he used to say. Such a soft landing. And we were looking at this and going, but hang on a moment, like, what if you don't make the shift? Then you end up worse than before. And so we did a series of studies, and sure enough, we found that even 8 weeks of supervised training wasn't enough for some people to learn theoretically, the better landing pattern. And so when Vibram started making these claims, I was like, hang on a moment, you guys are offering shoes as a medical product. Run in this and reduce injury risk. It's like, take this and your headache will go away. But you haven't given any consideration to the dosage, the timing, the responders, non-responders. Like, when you buy medicines, you get that pamphlet that comes inside, and it's normally folded up like 1,000 times. And it's like, it lists, who's this for, how does it work, what are the contraindications, what are the side effects, and what's the dosage, and how should I use it? That stuff was never done for the shoes, but they were being promoted like medical products, and it was inevitable that someone was going to go, hang on a moment, we're being conned here.
Because the thing was, it was so seductive, the whole barefoot running idea and movement, but people rushed into it as well. Is it a case that for some people it would have been very suitable, as you say, those 3 people in this out of 10 who transitioned to forefoot, but even for the ones who weren't transitioning to the forefoot, would given enough time it still have been fine for them, or would it have never worked? Was it that much snake oil on a level of snake oilosity?
I think you could. I think you probably would have found that with enough time, and possibly in some people enough instruction, it would work. Because we did. So the first study we did was, we said, right, let's just take a snapshot, and we got 51 runners to come in. I'll put these studies in the show notes as well. We had 51 athletes come in. They were habitual shoe wearers, as most people are, and we said, right, we're going to make you run in a biomechanics lab overground with all those fancy cameras and markers on your body, and we're going to measure things in your shoes and when you're barefoot. And what we found was that, so out of 51, 16 of them had higher loading rates when they were in the shoe condition, but 35 had higher loading rates, that's the risk factor, when they were barefoot. So 70%, let's call it, had more acute risk barefoot than when in shoes. We then took a subset of those runners and we supervised a transition over 8 weeks, and we measured them then again, having gotten them accustomed to running barefoot. And by that point, that 70% had dropped down to about 50%. So it was pretty clear that with some time and some instruction, people would gradually start to shift back. But we never managed to do the 4-month-long, 16-week, or the 6-month-long study that would potentially show whether everyone eventually shifts or whether some people just never would. And I would argue, and I remember making the point at the time, is if you sell something on the promise that it's going to reduce injury risk and allow you to run the same or more mileage with either the lower or the same risk, it's not viable if you're asking the person to take 9 months to earn that benefit. You can't, you can't say, here's your treatment and you'll see an effect in a year. That's not a good sell.
So circling back to Nike then, in this current lawsuit, then a 5 mile run is unlikely to have caused this one catastrophic injury, right? Because it's likely to have been an ongoing
I think
cumulative load.
I think they had
Because
to,
otherwise,
yeah.
surely there would have been thousands upon thousands of other people, because they must have sold millions of pairs of Alpha Fly 2s. So there would be surely an epidemic of these injuries. If it was a case that the shoe had a critical flaw, which I think is what they're claiming, is that the carbon plate is fundamentally focusing all the energy through those two small bones at the base of the big toe, which would be a massive design flaw, but we're not seeing it in other people.
Yeah, look, and I'm no podiatrist or expert on the bones in the foot, but that rigid surface would effectively prevent the foot from moving in a natural way and potentially dissipating some of those forces. So that's what they're claiming, is that if you use this product as intended, it will increase the risk of injury. And if they could prove that, then they would have a case. But the problem, as you point out, is you need a pretty significant and quite strong epidemiological base to prove that. Because again, 10,000 pairs of these shoes have been bought, and maybe in those 10,000 people, 200 have had this injury. But if you can't find a cohort of people who haven't run in these shoes and who don't have this injury, then you've got no actual risk change as a consequence of the shoe, if that makes sense. So you have to have a pretty strong study. And by the way, the study that I just mentioned, that systematic review, they find, I wanted to give you some of these numbers because it's a dose of reality here. They select initially, they identify 1,509 potential studies. They then remove 731 and screening titles and abstracts. They are left in the end with 83 systematic reviews on running injuries that were considered. Of the 83, 43 had discrepancies, so they had to be discarded, which leaves you with 40. Finally, 13 systematic reviews were included. So there are 13 systematic reviews that are available, and of those 13, only 5 of them were considered to be high enough quality to draw conclusions based on. Now, admittedly, that's a systematic review, so it's a number of studies. But the point I'm trying to make is that for all the problems caused by running injuries and the fact that 2 out of 3 people get injured every year according to the stats and so on, our understanding of these running injuries is actually quite poor. There's not a really good evidence base, and so this claim against Nike is going to have to be made in a court resting on a pretty flimsy foundation of epidemiological evidence. I think it'd be very difficult to convince someone that this shoe caused that injury, unless there is because even the study we just mentioned, that one that concluded that there's a potential risk of injury, it's only got 5 athletes in a case study. It's not a very strong study.
Oh, no. It sounds to me like it's surprisingly under-researched, the whole thing.
Yeah,
perhaps they don't want to find the results.
So the thing is that there's a lot of research, but none of it's very good. Most of it is quite bad research. And this stuff is difficult to do because injuries are so multifactorial. How do you ever isolate one thing? They're very, very difficult to do. And in this athlete's case, like your point is 5 miles, it was 5 miles or 5K? 5 miles. Is in one dose. If you can get that injury in one dose in 5 miles, either the shoe is very, very significantly increasing the risk of injury, and then you'd assume you'd find it elsewhere in other athletes, or that athlete was only 8 miles from an injury at the best of times. Like, so if
nearly there anyway, the bone was going to go.
Yeah,
it just happened to go.
It just happened to go, and maybe she could make the case that if it hadn't been for the shoe, it would have gone at 8 miles, not 5. But that's a different story from saying the shoe caused the injury.
Yeah, that's the big difference for me between Vibram and this case, is that there were so many cases with Vibram, and this is just a single one-off case.
Well, maybe who knows? Maybe by the time we get to next year and it's heard, there's 50 other athletes, and she's not the sole plaintiff claimant.
Speaking of the research, I had to laugh. I was reading the Skechers notes, and they prominently featured an endorsement from a chiropractor, Dr. Stephen Gautreau, who he cited an independent clinical study as proof of the shoe's benefits. As it turned out, the study didn't produce the results claimed in the advertising. Skechers had paid Dr. Gautreau to conduct the study, and they failed to disclose that he was married to a Skechers marketing executive.
So I had missed that.
That was yeah, that's it's a bit of a classic of manipulation, isn't it? And that was part of the 40 million that Skechers had to pay out. So once again, hey, going back to super shoes quickly, is there sort of like a run-in period if you start wearing super shoes where you should sort of get used to them like you would with barefoot, just do a couple of miles in them and then stop and
I
things
think
like that?
that's exactly. If there's one thing listeners take from this, it's that anytime you change something, you've got to manage that change as gradually as you reasonably can. Like again, I'll read to you the article. This is the one on the 5 athletes with navicular injuries. This article is intended to suggest a slow, gradual transition from habitual to carbon fiber plate footwear. So they're recognizing that. Every runner should, I think, recognize that if you change something, you've got to give it time. The bigger that change, the more time it'll take. And in fact, by the way, I think the biggest reason barefoot running worked for so many people is because when you take your shoe off and you run on the tarmac, your feet get sore. And so, like, not bone, skin. Like, you'd come home after 400 meters of running on the tarmac and your feet were burning. And so you couldn't do more because your skin limited your mileage. And I think a lot of people made the transition because they were limited and they had to really reduce their mileage quite significantly to manage what in effect was the weakest link in the chain, which was the skin. And I think the people who got injured are probably the ones who ignored that or ran on forgiving surfaces that didn't limit their mileage increase when they were barefoot. And anyway, point is, I think the same is true when you go the other direction. Anytime you change, you just have to ask, how big a change is this? And therefore, how much time do I need to give myself to adjust to this new stimulus, this new sensation?
Yeah, well, good luck to her in her lawsuit because I'm no particular fan of Nike, but taking on the 46 billion revenue company is brave. So we'll keep an eye on that one.
Yeah.
So we'll stay with athletics because I think we've wrapped up that one well enough for now. The Athlete of the Year awards were out this week, and the male one was won by Mondo Duplantis. So he was the male athlete of the year. So fair play to him. I think he broke 4 world records this year. It felt like more. Well, it says he broke 4. He got the world title, and he was unbeaten in 16 different competitions all year. He was literally untouchable, wasn't he? There's nobody within country mile of him.
Yeah.
On the female side, Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone won Female Athlete of the Year. The first athlete in history to win world titles in both the 400 flat and the 400 hurdles. She too was unbeaten in 24 races. I personally don't think that she should have won that Athlete of the Year. I think it was probably Chebet or even Jefferson Wooden. But
yeah, who neither of whom was even
in her own field.
Neither of whom was even nominated.
Yeah, I know.
So these awards, when
Wanyoni.
Yeah, when these awards were announced, like I think they were so anticlimactic. The actual winner of the award, because all the decisions had been made to exclude people who should have been the nominees a month before they were given. I don't understand this process of announcing nominees and then a month or 3 weeks or whatever it is later you announce the winner. Just do it like the Oscars. Well, I suppose they do announce who the nominees are going to be, but like, I don't know, you just do it in one go. Like, it's not that suspenseful that we have to have a 3-week build-up to who's going to win on a short list of 3.
I know, but you've got to spin it out these days, haven't you? And we're going to get on to spinning things out and spin. So yeah, it was Wanyoni actually won the men's track athlete above Lyles. So that was good to see because I think he probably deserved it more than Lyles. But Lyles had a decent enough season, but I don't think he did anything stellar, did he?
No, I think Lyles was solid, but not spectacular. He started his season late as well because of injury and so forth. So I think that one was pretty clear.
But I don't think you can really argue with Duplantis because he knows how to play the game as well, doesn't he? He knows how to play the media game. You can see that the way he plays the camera. He's good for that. And as he accepted his trophy, he took direct aim at Michael Johnson's Grand Slam track because that collapsed pretty much over the summer, didn't it? So when he went up to the podium, he said there was another tour that tried to exclude field events, and that didn't go so well, did it? I'm very proud to represent field eventers. So
I
that was
saw
obviously
that.
a direct,
I
and
saw
got
that.
a lot
Yeah.
of applause and laughter. And it's true, though, isn't it? And it went to prove that you can't have athletics without field in a way. And if
Yeah.
nothing else for Grand Slam track, it's
I
proved that.
I think one of my realizations this year, it's not like it was an epiphany, but it's just a gradual consolidation of a realization, is that the television broadcast of track really relies on field events because there's too much dead space in between. So track doesn't need a more dense track event program. Sorry, track and field athletics. Athletics doesn't need more track events, less field events. It just needs directors who know how to seamlessly integrate the field into the track program. That seems to be what's missing. So he's right. Like they need the field events. I think they could do more. We discussed this a few times this year with Sean and Malcolm Gladwell. They could do more to promote and make the field events more relatable, closer to fans. Pole vault in train stations, shot put in town squares, that sort of stuff. I think will really help. But of course, it needs to stay. And I agree with you. We've made jokes about Duplantis and how underwhelming it is when a world record goes a centimeter at a time. But the thing you'll say is he's there. He's competing. He's at the awards, picking up that award. He's promoting his own sport. That's great. When you said that McLaughlin Ravoni had won all 24 of her races, I thought you were making that number up. 24 races. How did she get that many? You hardly ever see her.
It's a good point, actually.
Like I was like,
that's
no, that's not right.
That's what I read.
But I suppose
I'll have to double check my facts on that one.
no. But I think you're probably right
Because
because you probably
you're right, she doesn't
count.
race very often, does she?
Oh, but you know what it'll be like? You count the heats and the semi and the final. So every
Heats.
championship is 3. Then she also did Grand Slam track, where of course you doubled because she was doing the 100 and the 400 or the 200 or the 400, whatever it was that she was. But you're pairing it up. So she did do quite a lot. I still feel like like if you said to me Femke Bol or McLaughlin Ravoni, clearly athletically one is superior to the other, but at least Bol's there. She's in the relays. She's in the indoors. She's in the diamond leagues. It's just, yeah, for me, I would give it to the athlete who represents the sport globally more.
Yeah. Did you see Grand Slam track? I think it's probably in its death throes at the minute because this week Johnson, apparently they're in like $10 to $13 million worth of debt they owe to athletes and the vendors, and Johnson offered the vendors, and I think he's offered the athletes as well. They've offered them a 50 cents on the dollar offer to say basically, look, if you take half of what we owe you, otherwise we're going to go bust and you might not get anything. And as it turns out, that World Athletics itself is owed around £30,000, $40,000 by Grand Slam track, and World Athletics have turned around and said, no, we're not having that.
Yeah.
Which is fine for World Athletics. They've got loads of money they can afford to lose $40,000. But some of the smaller vendors, like the people who set up the tracks and did all the lighting and the staff who were there, it's harsh on them. But I think that probably signals the end of Grand Slam track. It was a brave but ill-conceived idea, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it poisons the well for the future, right? Because which athletes are going to now commit to 6 or 8 or whatever it's going to be races for the next person who comes along, unless they guarantee them payment and they pay it up front. But now the power balance is all skewed in the opposite direction also. So there'll be no confidence left anymore except in the existing structure, which I'm okay with. I didn't see the need for Grand Slam track. I didn't think it differentiated itself enough. Too many of the events were meh. Like, I don't want to watch 100-meter specialists jump over hurdles or 400-meter athletes run a 200 because they have to. So it's just, history will record it as a pretty spectacular failure, I think.
Yeah, going on. Did you see, you mentioned Sean earlier on. There was an article Sean Ingle in The Guardian wrote yesterday about athletics and the future of athletics. He wrote about his meeting with the World Athletics chief executive, John Ridgen. Apparently, John walked up to Sean at a party and said, I read your recent Guardian column and I thought it was very unfair because I think Sean was criticizing athletics. and its future sort of thing. But Richard made some good points here. He says that athletics isn't struggling as much as people perceive. He says that income for world athletics, it surged by 25% over the last 3 to 4 years. Global television, media, and social media audiences are trending upwards. He says the 2025 World Championship in Tokyo wasn't just another meet. He says it was the single biggest sporting event of the year, which I find hard to believe. He says global cities ring him up to say they want the World Championships. And he says during the last World Championships, World Athletics generated 700 million video views on its social channels, doubling the figure from 2 years ago. So he's thinking that things are on the up, and World Athletics are looking things like drones to improve the optics of the events, the filming and things like that. And other things like athletes will be allowed to bring their own media teams with them and to promote themselves. It won't all just be handed over to World Athletics. So they're clearly taking this very seriously, athletics. But I'm not sure I don't want them to see them distance themselves too far from the traditional, because we know that social media is very ephemeral and it's pretty meaningless in many cases. And I'd hate to see athletics drown itself in a sea of mediocrity that way.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, first of all, that article that he's talking about that he felt was unfair was the piece that Sean Ingle wrote and published just before the Tokyo World Champs. For instance, it alluded to the most watched track and field race of the year was the iShow Speed race against Noah Lyles. Mm-hmm. That was the kind of argument Sean was making. I didn't think it was unfair. I thought it was actually a pretty realistic portrayal of where we were. And Sean's definitely not hard on track and field. He's at all these major championships and he knows them. But I do think there has been a perception, like Mike sometimes has brought it up, that athletics is dying. But when you watch Diamond League races, as long as those races are in established hubs for track and field, they are sold out. Like the Diamond League swing through Europe is always packed. The stadiums are full. There's lots of hype. I think it looks actually quite healthy. Where it looks less healthy is when you try and take it to new markets. And that's the dilemma. It's what you're talking about now. Instead of geographical markets that are new or established, you're talking about age markets. And it's interesting, like if the social media uptake is so high, like does a person who watches a TikTok or an Instagram video become a consistent follower of track and field athletics? That's the question I suppose they've got to try and grapple with. But you're right. I mean, we are the generation 2 spectator. That athletics is starting to say who's going to be the generation 4 in 2045, who's going to be filling those stadiums and how do we get them in there. And I agree with you. Like the beauty of the sport is it's simple to follow. The first one across the line, the furthest distance, the highest jump, that's what wins it. And if you lose that, then athletics is compromised, and they've got a dilemma to solve around that one, I think.
There's a line in the article that he says, one thing we haven't been able to do is take that billion people that run around the block to keep fit and move them across to becoming athletic fans. It's true, there are a lot of people who actually do the sport that they have no interest in. But it's a transition. That's one of the challenges he says is so difficult, is getting that visceral feeling of athletics across. How actually difficult it is to run a marathon at 4:40 pace, or how quick the 100 meters actually is, or how high Duplantis actually jumps. It's getting that over to the people through a screen that's the difficult part, because we have no concept of it. I've never run a 4:40 mile in my life. I never will be able to. And I think most of the people who are watching can't really understand just how difficult that is, because you see big hits in the NFL and rugby and it's spectacular, but athletics doesn't have that head-to-head contact, does it?
No, but I mean, I would argue in some ways athletics, running in particular, probably gives you the best opportunity to feel what it's like to be an elite athlete, because you can try and run 100 meters at 2:03 marathon pace and see what it's like. And you go like, my goodness, they do this 4,200 times? Or 420 rather, sorry. That's my math. Yeah. So in some respects, it's the most relatable because everyone does it. And I don't know, like it's a dilemma though, because relational personality, rivalry is what draws people to the sport. But do they have to already do it in order to be interested? Like if I didn't play tennis, would I be interested in watching Yannick Sinner and Carlos Alcaraz in a Grand Slam final? Probably not. So you got to do it in order to have interest in it, no?
Really? I've
Yeah.
never played tennis in my life, but I enjoy watching tennis.
Okay, so that's a counterpoint. Fair.
I think, yeah, I don't think you need to. It's like I've never played American football, but I love watching American football. I think if you can appreciate sport for
Yeah,
what it is, I
yeah.
don't think you actually
No.
have to do it. I think it enhances your perception of it because then, as we were saying,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
do perhaps you do know how to do it. I didn't know
So
how hard cycling up a
how has
hill was
tennis
until I did
captured
it.
you? Why would you not watch the 1 and 2 squash players in the world in the Grand Slam final of the Egyptian Open or something?
We had this conversation actually. I find
Yeah.
squash very difficult to watch because of the speed of it and the way it's filmed, isn't it? It's just two people crawling
Yeah.
over each other to try and hit a ball back and get in each other's way. But with tennis, it's sort of gladiatorial because it's
Yeah.
of the way you can see it's all there in one place, and you can understand the skill sets that are being used. I don't really understand squash in the same way. I probably would watch squash and this might be the crux of it, if it was enough on the line.
Yeah.
When it gets to tennis, I'm only really interested in when it gets to the sharp end of the tournaments. You can forget the first week of a Grand Slam for me, really. I'll sort of follow it in the news, but it's the Sinner versus Alcaraz sort of battles that you want to watch, where you know the people. I don't know anybody in the squash world,
Yeah.
so squash has come to the Olympics, by the way, I think,
In LA
because
or
we were discussing how to
2032
film it. I think it's going to be one of those
exhibition sports.
guest sports, exhibition sports. So how you film squash, I don't know, because it's so fast. But I think we're going slightly off track here. But it is interesting to think about what sports you watch and that you have no idea about. You enjoy the Winter Olympics, you said last week,
Yeah, that's true.
but you're never going to get in a bobsleigh.
I
I would
disprove.
pay to see you in a bobsleigh, but
Yeah, I've just disproved my own theory around not being engaged in sports you don't do. Yeah, so you're right, but again, like athletics, you'd think has got this audience of people who can relate to it better than any other sport, but their conversion proportion is probably among the lowest. Because you haven't enticed that person who does the park run to actually watch other people do what they do every weekend, and that's an interesting dilemma.
I think it's how much people are willing to put into it as well. If you're willing to actually engage in learning about the sport and the nuances of it, you're going to get a lot more out of it. And I think that's where what scares me about only having social media clips and like the race that Sean was on about, just a one-off, 100 meters against, what was he called?
I Show Speed. I Show Speed.
I Show Speed. See, I didn't even know that was going on at the time.
No,
But
neither did I.
yeah, I think the more that you immerse yourself in sport, the more you get out of it. Obviously, I'm quite immersed in sport, so I'm probably not a good example. Anyway, we're digressing, so we're going to move on. Because there was a paper written this week that I spotted. And the paper is called The Effect of Changing Weekly Contact Training Duration Beyond Current Guidelines on Head Acceleration Events in Rugby Union. And I know that obviously your name is attributed to this. So basically, the study simulated the effect of reducing contact training duration on overall in-season head acceleration event exposure within men and women's rugby union. And when I'd read it, or read parts of it, I admit I haven't read it all, I thought, well, it's obvious. If you lower the amount of contact time in training, you're going to get less head acceleration events. That's like, it's just obvious, but that's apparently not the case.
Yeah, it's not the case people would have liked it to be. So I'll give you the short background here. Is first of all contact sports have got a concussion problem to solve because the nature of the sport exposes the head to impacts, and head impacts cause concussions. But in the last 5 or 6 years, for those who don't know, the conversation has evolved beyond just concussion. You know, the concussion is the head impact that causes a clinical outcome. You can see the player is injured. But there are many other head impacts that don't cause a clinical outcome, but they also count. So that's why we've moved towards talking about head acceleration events or head impacts as opposed to concussions. That way you can count 15 impacts a match, all of which may be relevant later in the person's life, as opposed to the 1 in 100 that causes an injury. So the net is now larger than it ever used to be. It used to be looking for 1 in 1,000 events or 200 events. Now it's looking at 200 of 200. And that's where the mouth guard comes in, right? About 5 years ago, the sport started to say, well, we've got to reduce our exposure or the players' exposure to these head impacts. And where are we going to do that? We can do it in matches and we can do it in training. Now, matches are difficult because there's a certain requirement. Like, you just have to make tackles. You have to play 80 minutes, whatever it is. And so the focus turns to training. And they say, well, let's manage the training because that's the low-hanging fruit. Because in theory, if a player has 15 head impacts on a weekend playing a match, but they have 30 impacts during the week, the training is actually causing more head impacts than the game is. So maybe we can target head impacts in training. But when we started to look at the mouthguard data, what we discovered is that that's not what happens. It happens in the NFL. In American football, training accounted for a significant proportion of a player's total head acceleration load in a season. And so they instituted a policy that limits contact training. You probably know the specifics of that, but teams are not allowed to do more than X numbers of contact sessions in a season. And that was done directly as a response to the finding that head impacts and concussions were happening in training as much, if not more, than in matches. In rugby union, that doesn't happen. It's the exact opposite picture. And so if you look at a player, for every I hope I get these numbers right. For every 7 or 8, I think it's for every 8 impacts in a match, there's only 1 in training. So only 10%, give or take, of a rugby player's head impact load comes in training, and the other 90% is in matches. And so what this paper did is it was the first author is a guy called Tom Sawchuk, who's based out of Leeds, really like statistical genius guy. We've done a few projects with him. Like he's great with stats and models and so on. Is they ran this model simulation. They said, let's take contact training from where it is now and cut it by 25%, cut it by 50%, cut it by 75%, swap it with other types of training. In other words, let's look at all these permutations and ask, what's the true effect of doing less training on head accelerations? And the answer is way, way, way smaller than you might think. And so, for example, I wanted to quote one of those findings for you. You can reduce training by 75%, but you only cause an 11% reduction in head impacts. So you have a disproportionate reduction in training to cause a small reduction in head accelerations. It's just not a high leverage intervention. Does that make sense?
That's really surprising to me, because it would, you'd assume that just lowering something, and that's why I introduce it that way, is that just by lowering it, it was obviously going to have a proportionate effect. So why the difference with the NFL? Is it maybe because the NFL's games are actually, the action time is a lot shorter? Because in rugby, you've got 80 minutes of continuous action. In the NFL, although it's 60 minutes, it's very, very short action. So their practices would be longer.
Yeah,
proportionally.
So in 1 hour of training in the NFL, you probably experience 20 hits because you just go scrimmage, scrimmage, scrimmage. You keep the offensive line on the field. You just go hit, 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 hit. In rugby, you're not simulating a game in training. They're doing drills, which are small-sided, small spaces. So the proximity of players, you're never running at full speed. Like the rugby training sessions, I think, are fundamentally different in nature. And remember, when we spoke to John Dobson last year, he said he learned as a coach a long time ago that if I make my players do full hits in training, I will have nobody left to pick on a Thursday for the game at the weekend. So I think in rugby, out of necessity, it's evolved to the point where they just do not risk high contact loads in training. And so when we surveyed the coaches 5 years ago, when we were trying to get an understanding of what happens in training, if rugby players do more than 20 to 30 minutes of contact work in a week, it's probably quite a big week for them. In the NFL, I think before these interventions, they were hitting and hitting and hitting because the concussions weren't necessarily happening, but the head impacts were.
Why then don't you stipulate in your research what kind of training it is? Surely you should have contact training and non-contact training.
Yeah.
There's a bare minimum of being able to, and so you'd have different results surely if you split it between contact training and non-contact training.
You do, and so when we had that group, it was a contact load guidance group that was set up 5 years ago. We divided training into different parts. There's obviously field-based and off-field, gym. And then on the field, there's non-contact work, which is running type fitness drills. There was controlled contact, which is tackle bags, working with small-sided spates, grappling type drills. And then there was full contact training. So the World Rugby guidelines that were published around contact training did stipulate this is what's recommended as an upper limit for full contact. This is what's recommended as an upper limit for controlled contact training. So it was in fact done that way. And what this paper did was it took those guidelines and says, all right, let's say that we weren't real conservative and we cut the full contact by, as I say, 75%. We took away all but 1/4 of what's currently done or advised. And the answer is you barely, it's not zero effect, but you barely make a dent in head acceleration loads, because it's kind of like taxing the poor, to use a bad analogy. It's like if you want the state to get more money, like you're not going to get it taxing the poor. And that's what this is. Reducing contact load in training makes a small contribution to overall head impact because they just don't happen there. And that's true for controlled and full contact training.
Is there an argument that players now, because they get so little contact training, so little practice in tackling, that's why we see an epidemic of bad tackling and injuries in matches?
That is the $1,000,000 question. And that's part of what this paper is actually intended to ask people to think about. So when we sat down to write this paper, the discussion was, right, three things to emphasize. One is training makes such a small contribution that two, reducing training but not worrying about matches is going to be a sort of drop in the ocean of a player's head impact load. And three, if you do go this way and you cut the training even more than it already has been lowered, you probably deny the player the opportunity to become proficient at tackling. And so then you're going to take a player who's done less contact work in the training week, and you're going to put them in a match situation where they have to make those tackles and they're not proficient to do so. And so the paper will become, I think, quite an important part of the discussion around how do we manage risk. And if most of the risk, and as I said, 8 to 9 out of 10 impacts are happening in matches, that's the thing you want to really try and solve. And you can only solve that in two ways. You can either take them away or you can make them safer. And are you making it safer by giving players less practice time? No. So there's an argument to be made here, and it's actually stated like this in the paper, is that you might need to do more contact training in order to have lower match risk. And nobody thinks about that. So you get all these advocacy groups, like every month or 2 weeks on social media, someone tags me and they're going off about we need less contact work, we need players to not do so much in training, that you got to manage the risk. It's like, guys, there's an unintended consequence here that you can reduce the contact training risk and increase the match head impact risk. So let's think about this, because you're not really thinking thoroughly about those data.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So I know we might be looking at rugby again in the future, so
I'm sure we will. So for example, 50% of all tackles in matches don't cause a head acceleration event. So it's possible to make a tackle or a ball carry and not have your head accelerate in that contact or tackle. But some players do it and some players don't. And why? That's the $1,000,000 question. And if you can find out why that is, and if it's a technical proficiency thing, some players are just better.
Technique, yeah.
Yeah, some players are just better at making tackles without head acceleration. Then what you want is you want more tackles in training, but without head acceleration. So we're no longer using like one brush for like painting all tackles with one brush. Don't tackle, it's dangerous. We're saying some tackles are risky, others are not. Do more of the less risky ones and fewer of the risky ones. And that's kind of where it's going. And this paper is, I think, going to be a really important part of making that case for coaches and people in future.
Right. And we'll move on to And Finally this week. And Finally actually comes from one of our supporters, Petulant Skeptic, because he did an excellent post. Do you remember last week we did an article about the Guardian caps and why they weren't actually as effective as we thought in the NFL? Well, Petulant came up with this great analogy from hospitals. He says it's undeniably true that getting doctors and nurses to clean their hands reduces the spread of infection between hospitalized patients. Hand hygiene, etc. they're supposed to wear a mask or a gown or both. But studies that look at these precautions consistently find that they have an effect in reducing spread of infections from patient to patient, but that wanes over time. So then you observe people in hospitals as whether they stick into these cautions. Some studies, he says, use surreptitious observation of compliance, and some use very visible observers in the hospitals. And what they found was when you begin having care team members wear extra gowns and masks around infected patients, you reliably reduce the rate of infectious spread. But regardless of compliance, the effect does wane over time. The reduction can be restored by putting visibly identifiable observers in the care areas to surveil whether the team is complying with the precautions. So the act of being observed acts as a reminder that people should be wearing the safety equipment. What it seems to apply is that the gowns and masks and gloves aren't the actual mechanism of infectious spread reduction. There's something, or lots of very small things, that change in the behavior of people when they do the ritual of putting on the gown and gloves, and then they know that they're being watched, and that's what reduces the infectious spread. It's not really about the gowns and the masks and the gloves themselves and what they do. It's about the idea to the care team member that they are the possible vector for infectious spread. So if you think about this then and put it in relation to guardian caps, it might not be the act of having a guardian cap on your head, the actual foam that's protecting you. It's yourself and other players then having this visual reminder that there is a risk of concussion. They see the cap, they think there's a risk of concussion. And what that got me thinking was, if the guardian caps over time are going to become essentially less effective because they'll become less of an impactful reminder, because you'd say, oh well, players wear helmets already, surely they act as reminders, but helmets are so ubiquitous, they just seem as part of the uniform. They're not seen as a safety asset to the players. So it's really interesting. So actually, if all the players in the NFL were wearing guardian caps, perhaps they'd be even less effective again.
In time, yeah. But initially not. So in effect, and first of all, thank you for the comment on discourse. This is the kind of thing that I meant earlier, where someone who listens has got an insight because they're an expert in area B or A, and they're applying it to our area B. And this was a superb post. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So what it's basically saying is that in this case, the Guardian cap is a symbol of head impact and concussion reduction, but not the mechanism. That's the simplest explanation of it. So you could, for instance, say that every month we're going to paint all helmets a different neon color, and you'd get the same benefit as the Guardian cap.
Yeah, well, essentially, yeah. I just think it's a fascinating way of looking at it.
So what you need,
we were looking at it all wrong.
Yeah, what you need is a campaign to create awareness. And the reason I enjoyed the post so much is because we've, as I said last time we discussed this, we have thrown so many different things at this problem at the same time. You know, we've got prevention mechanisms, we've got tackle height law, we've got education campaigns, we've got the head injury process. Some people would say scrum caps. That's not one that we've backed yet, but that's another intervention. And you see always, you do something, you find a change, you think, hey, it's working, next season it's gone. And it just resonated with me because I think every time you make a change, you're driving an awareness campaign. Now, that can cut two ways, by the way, because when we make efforts to reduce concussion risk and we tell the world that the tackles will be sanctioned more severely to try and prevent concussions, it puts people on heightened alert for concussions, and you find more of them just because you're aware of them. So we simultaneously find more of the problem and might be preventing the problem through behavior change. So that's a tricky one. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that's interesting is that, like with helmets, guardian caps, scrum caps in rugby, the moment players see protective equipment, there is a risk that they take more behavioral risks in play because they see protection and they say, well, now I can use my head more than I would have done otherwise. So you could argue it both ways, is that thing that's a symbol of prevention might actually become a symbol of recklessness. And how this all plays out, it's why it's so complex. It's really interesting to know that the effectiveness of these interventions wanes even when compliance doesn't.
I wonder if there is perception, if a player is wearing a guardian cap, that you can hit them harder or perhaps differently. Probably not.
That's always been a theory, yeah. We've got a paper that should be published really soon looking at scrum caps in rugby union, and it will show that per 1,000 tackles, players who wear scrum caps are more likely to go off for head injuries than players who don't. Now, what you don't know is what you don't know is causality. It might be that players who wear scrum caps have always been more likely to go for head injuries, and that's why they wear scrum caps. Or you might find that they are the players who happen to be in positions that would have gone off. We try to adjust for position and that sort of thing in the data set. But there is that so-called Superman or risk compensation effect that you always have to be mindful of when you're trying to understand these things, because otherwise you introduce it. And this was the criticism of the NFL, by the way, because as we said last week, they definitely found that in the first season that Guardian caps were introduced, the concussion rates in training were 50% lower. And they attribute it to the Guardian cap. Now, the problem then is you say, oh, the Guardian cap was the reason for the drop, therefore everyone must use the Guardian cap. But if that Guardian cap is going to cause risk behaviors to go up, then your solution becomes your problem, and then you've got a real dilemma on your hands. So that's the dilemma. But like we said last week, we are all as contact sports in such an unenviable position because we're kind of obliged to throw everything at the problem as fast as we can, and therefore we're going to get these messy situations.
Fantastic post. I just love thinking a different way of looking at things.
Yeah, it was
so just
amazing.
one quick one.
Yeah, I'm going to put the link to that post, by the way, just before we wrap up. I'm going to put the link to that post in the show notes. Obviously, those of you who are not on Discourse as supporters of the pod won't be able to see it, but there's another incentive for you to sign up.
By the way, how many studies are you writing at the same time? How many balls are you juggling and keeping in the air? Because you've always got studies on the boil.
Yeah, at the moment.
Have you found time for podcasting?
Yeah, sometimes I don't. That's why we gloss over things sometimes. At the moment, I'm working on 2 as the sort of first author, and then there's another 5 or 6 where I'm contributing, editing. So, but like, yeah, sometimes it's too many. Okay. But anyways, sorry. Last and finally,
I just read this earlier this morning. Did you see Serena Williams is making a comeback? Apparently, maybe.
I saw that she'd re-entered the testing pool. That was a headline I saw.
Yeah. That's all we know, to be honest with you. Yeah, Serena Williams has re-entered the testing pool. So athletes or players have to make themselves available throughout the competition testing for 6 months before they're allowed to enter an event. And so when I saw this, the first thing I thought was, you remember the doubles in the US Open? Remember they changed the format, the mixed doubles? I wonder if he's going to enter that for a bit of a knockabout.
Maybe, but
perhaps with her sister, if they do the mixed doubles.
Venus made a comeback, although maybe Venus never left the testing pool, but Venus came back to play singles, right? So she'd stayed in it.
She stayed in it, but Serena left. But I think women's tennis, especially these big names, even if they're getting on a bit, are still good for the sport because they're instantly recognizable, aren't they? And it would be good, I think. Because, I mean, we were torn on those mixed doubles, weren't we? Whether or not they should have been moved and highlighted in beforehand. But
only on behalf of the genuine mixed doubles players. Yeah. My last stand, finally, Black Friday specials last week. So I said, I need a mattress. So I was looking for a new mattress. And I want to read you the features of a mattress that I found. For added comfort, this is an advertisement for this top layer of this mattress. Copper, tourmaline, and graphite are all applied to the vis copper layer in the form of microparticles. Copper aids in stimulating the immune system. Tourmaline, which I'd never heard of, increases oxygen levels in cell tissue, encourages blood circulation, and stimulates cell vitality. Graphite multiplies heat dissipation and offers protection against electromagnetic waves such as Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and 4G that can interfere with your sleep and nervous system, especially if you are electrosensitive. Have you ever heard such bullshit in your life? I emailed them, I said, what about 5G, guys? No, I didn't. But it's such...
But does it only protect you if you've got your devices underneath you or something?
I don't know. Like, I mean, it's... So that's what you pay. Like, so that's the... So if you go mattress shopping now, the difference between that mattress and like a mattress that you sleep on is like £800. This is a £1,200 mattress because it deflects electromagnetic waves from you. I mean, it's just Makes you realize the level of garbage that people will consume.
Do you remember the cycling jerseys that had some sort of something woven into them? Might have
Was
been
it
graphene to stop
graphene?
electromagnetic waves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just astonishing. Like I just went to bed.
So, yeah, you didn't buy that then?
I did not buy that one. No.
Because
If you just say like it's real comfortable and it won't like move around and spring and it doesn't creak, then I say like take my money. But now you're going to tell me all this stuff about graphene and graphite and tourmaline. I'm like, nah, I'll just sleep on the floor. And that's mine finally.
yeah, that's well, they picked on the wrong person if they tried selling that to you.
Everyone should be the wrong person if someone's buying and falling for that nonsense. But anyway,
Somebody's gonna buy it.
yeah, some
Otherwise they
people will do
wouldn't sell
that.
'em.
Walk into the shop, give me your most expensive mattress. I don't care what it claims to do. I'll just take it.
Yeah, but it blocks all your signals, so you can't use your phone in bed. Perhaps that's part of the benefit.
That'd be a good way to test if it works. Try send a message from your bed. Anyway, I said no because I'm buying an Insta360, so I got to save money.
Okay.
That's it for today. Thanks
Are
very
you going to
much.
stick that on your bike?
Yeah, and for the Insta360,
On your,
definitely.
on your mountain bike for the race?
Yeah, well, that's the plan, definitely. Yeah, I don't know if I'll have it in time because you can't. Well, you can get them in South Africa, but it might be cheaper for me to buy it in the UK on the Black Friday specials. But that's the plan for sure: is to film it and overlay some graphics and stuff like that. It'd be fun.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah. I'll see if I can make it happen by then. Yeah, that's it for today. Thanks very much for indulging our shoe, athletics, rugby talk. And we've got another special guest lined up real soon. That'll be hopefully the next feature pod. And we will, as always, be back next week with a spotlight in some form. As mentioned, there's so much more going on over in our supporters club over at Discourse. If you fancy engaging, asking, sharing your own knowledge and insights, please feel free. You know exactly how to do that. We will see you there, or we will see you or speak to you again next week. For now, though, it is goodbye.